Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Exodus chapter 18. So after the Israelites have escaped slavery in Egypt, they've been progressing through the wilderness and made their way all the way to Midian and Mount Horeb. That's the same region Moses was living in chapters 2 and 3 when he met his wife Zipporah and his father-in-law Jethro. A small vignette in this chapter addresses practical problems that the Israelites would have been facing, introducing discipleship doctrine that's still applicable even to us as Christians today. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away, and her 2 sons, of whom one was named Gershom, for Moses said, "I have been a sojourner in this foreign land." The other was named Eliezer, for he said, "The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." So when the Israelites find themselves in Midian, Jethro gets word of the miracles that God has done to liberate the Israelites from slavery. It's implied here that Zipporah left Moses and went back to her father's house with their 2 kids in chapter 4 after the whole ordeal about circumcision. Nevertheless, God bringing Moses and the people out of Egypt back to this region of Midian shows that God was with them all along. And here we're also formally introduced to Moses' second son named Eliezer, which means God is my help, because of how God has delivered them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, "I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her." Then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. So after all this time, Moses is finally reunited with his wife and his kids and his father-in-law. And it seems that there's no hard feelings between any of them. Zipporah was angry with Moses and had doubted God's calling on his life. But following God's instruction really did lead to the deliverance and salvation of an entire nation. And Zipporah and Jethro are humble enough to acknowledge that. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had befallen them on the journey, and how the Lord had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. So Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. So Jethro, who is a pagan priest in Midian, is converted to being a follower of the Yahweh God of Israel after he hears about how that God delivered the Israelites from slavery. And here I think it shows that we can never underestimate the power of simply sharing our testimony of how God has delivered us. Whether it converts your stubborn father-in-law to repentance, or causes another believer to rejoice in God, or simply makes another person evaluate God's role in the world, our stories and our testimonies are powerful, and they need to be shared. It came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and make known the statutes of God and his laws." As the Israelites live in Midian, Moses is set up as a judge over them. So anyone with any sort of dispute, financial, civil, criminal, they would come up to Moses, and Moses would make a decision on what to do going forward after hearing both sides. So Moses, the prophet who's gotten the most instruction from God thus far, judges the people with God's voice on his behalf. And notice that this isn't a far cry from Genesis 1's vocation of humanity to rule and subdue the earth and be a judge over it, be an image of God. But Jethro sees a problem with the current setup for the Israelites. Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." Jethro realizes that this job is too much for Moses, who has to listen and judge cases all day, every day, with no breaks. Not to mention, the people also get worn out because they're waiting days and days and days to get an audience with Moses. It's not sustainable for anyone, and it's in no one's best interest in the long run. A top source of frustration for many people in the church are people who don't set boundaries, and then they end up serving in too many places. That leads people to feel like they aren't appreciated or they aren't getting enough in return, and so they get burnt out, and then before you know it, they've turned their back on the church altogether. We need to listen to Jethro here. We can't do it alone, and that's by design. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God. Then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk, and the work which they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain. And you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people also will go to their place in peace. Jethro's advice is to teach the people God's instructions, to choose the wisest among them and set them up as underlying judges, creating a kind of court hierarchy with Moses and then ultimately God at the top. Jethro says this will undoubtedly alleviate Moses and the people's struggles and restlessness. Of course, it's vulnerable to give up control like that. You have to put a lot of trust in your fellow man and in God. But the burden lifted off of you, that's priceless, because now you're sharing that burden with other people. Surely this is the story Paul has in mind in Galatians 6, when he preaches on discipleship relations in Jesus' church. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. They judged the people at all times. The difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way into his own land. Moses listens to Jethro, and his idea works. But don't miss too that Jethro was a pagan priest up until a few weeks ago, and he's someone Moses probably had a complicated relationship with. Considering the way his wife estranged herself from him. Nevertheless, Moses also shows humility when he values Jethro's opinion after he's converted and after they reconcile. In the same way, we can't let faith maturity or past relationships keep us from listening to genuinely good, godly advice. This small scene between a prophet and his father-in-law really provides a heavy theological framework on which to base practical discipleship relationships. That's something Paul realized and utilized by quoting the need to bear each other's burdens that's originally found here in this chapter. Teaching, developing, and entrusting other believers while keeping God at the head can be hard and make us feel vulnerable, but they are ultimately necessary acts of Christian faith if we're to experience Jesus' communities the way Jesus intended. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.